I always looked forward to the first day of elk hunting season with the same excitement I used to feel for Christmas as a kid. In Montana, it always lands on the Tuesday following Halloween, almost like an unofficial state holiday. Schools often close because so many teachers and younger students head out into the woods to hunt. This year, though, my plans took an unexpected turn. At the last minute, a client from Texas insisted that I meet him on Tuesday to discuss his account. I tried to persuade him to reschedule, even suggesting he work with another representative from our company, but he refused. Since his account was critical for my job, I had no choice but to comply. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I found myself working on the opening day of elk season. Frustrated but resigned, I realized I would have to leave for the hunting camp on Tuesday night instead of joining in the camaraderie and fun the night before. It meant missing out on the whiskey drinking and card games, leaving me behind both in my drinking and poker losses. Still, I figured I could catch up once I got there. I packed my hunting gear into the back of my truck, added a case of whiskey, and started the 3-hour drive to our camp in Flathead County. My wife, Cindy, had left me a note saying she was heading out with some girlfriends for the evening and wished me good luck with the hunt. I chuckled to myself. Most wives were thrilled to have their husbands out of the house for the first week of elk season. For them, it was like a short vacation. About an hour into the drive, dusk gave way to full darkness as I navigated the curves of Route 12. That's when I saw it. A service van ahead of me struck a massive bull elk and sent it sprawling off to the roadside. As I slowed down, I saw a cow elk get hit as well, landing near the bull. Pulling over, I turned on my truck's headlights and stepped out to inspect. Both elk were dead. The bull had an impressive rack that spanned nearly 2 feet, while the cow was smaller but still a fine animal. I made a snap decision. Pulling out my hunting tags, I filled them out and attached them to the elk before loading the animals into my truck. I needed to get them to a spot where I could butcher them before the cold made the process more difficult. Luckily, I remembered an old barn belonging to a buddy just a few miles back, so I headed there and turned on the outdoor light. With a lantern for extra illumination, I got to work on the bull first, marveling at its antlers, the most impressive I'd ever seen. As I worked, a thought struck me: this bull could win the big elk pool at my hunting lodge. The ethical debate about whether this was fair, it being roadkill instead of a hunted prize, flashed briefly through my mind, but I dismissed it. Rules were rules, and as long as it was a legally tagged animal, it counted. Besides, I'd never been close to winning before, and this felt like my chance. After finishing at the barn, I drove back home to clean up and change. Butchering elk is messy work, and no matter how careful I tried to be, I always ended up with blood on my clothes. Once the meat was securely loaded into the truck, I decided there was no point rushing to camp. It was too late to join the guys for whiskey and cards anyway. At least my tags were in order, so I didn't have to worry about the trouble that comes from losing one, like what happened to a buddy of mine once. That poor guy got fined heavily because his tag fell off during transport, and the local judge, a self-important blowhard named Victor Harper, refused to believe it was just bad luck. It was well past 11 when I finally pulled into my driveway and hit the button to open the garage door. The house was completely dark, so I assumed Cindy had already gone to bed. But then I noticed something strange: a brand new Cadillac was parked in my spot. Cindy's Toyota was still in its usual place. Curious, I checked the Cadillac's hood. It was cool, meaning the car had been there for quite a while. The keys were still in the ignition. Feeling uneasy, I quietly entered the house and listened. The silence was unnerving. Slowly, I made my way upstairs toward the bedroom. As I got closer, I heard snoring, loud snoring. My stomach tightened. Cindy never snored. I stepped into the bedroom, and the moonlight streaming through the window revealed 2 figures tangled together in bed. Anger flared inside me as I flipped the light switch, ready for a showdown. But neither of them stirred. Cindy lay naked, her arm draped over a man with a beer belly and a thick patch of chest hair. The man, none other than Judge Victor Harper himself, had his pudgy hand wrapped around my wife's breast. For a moment, I stood there, my thoughts racing. Of all people, my wife had brought this pompous fool into our bed. I felt a surge of disgust, not just at her betrayal but at her choice of lover. We both knew plenty of men who would have been better options. My gaze fell on the empty whiskey bottles on the nightstand. No wonder they were oblivious to the light. They were clearly plastered. I turned and stormed downstairs, grabbing my hunting rifle from the truck. The idea of shooting Harper right there in my bedroom crossed my mind. But as I rummaged for ammunition, the reality of the situation sank in. Killing him would land me in jail, prime suspect and all. Jail time would mean missing out on showing off my prize-winning elk. With Harper not worth the risk, I began to hatch another plan, one that would serve him right without ruining my own life. I emptied the bowl, set it back on the table, and picked up a syringe that was lying nearby. Holding it above Victor's snoring face, I lowered it until it hovered just a few inches above his mouth. In my other hand, I clutched the elk heart, squeezing it hard. A stream of bloody water spurted out, some of it landing in Victor's mouth, causing him to choke and sputter awake. Quickly, I set the syringe down, grabbed my hunting knife, and pressed the point against the elk heart in my left hand. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Victor flinch and let out a sharp hiss as he straightened up in the bed. His eyes darted between the bloody heart in my hand and Cindy's blood-smeared chest. Gasping, he coughed and spit out the blood he had swallowed. I turned my masked face toward him, and that was all it took. His face twisted in terror as he jumped out of the bed, completely naked, and bolted out of the room like his life depended on it. The sight of him rushing down the hallway toward the garage was almost comical. I followed him at a leisurely pace and shouted, "You're next," just as he slammed the car door of his Cadillac shut and peeled out of the driveway. Once he was gone, I went back upstairs to clean up. I put Victor's clothes back on the chair, slipped his cell phone into the pocket of his pants, and grabbed Cindy's phone, sliding it into my own pocket for safekeeping. Next, I gathered the bowl and syringe, took them to the kitchen sink, and ran the dishwasher, ensuring there would be no incriminating evidence left behind. Heading to my truck, I turned off all the lights and shut the garage door. Driving away from the house, I couldn't help but chuckle at the memory of Victor's terrified escape. Just a few miles down the road, I spotted a large Cadillac abandoned on the shoulder. A grin spread across my face as I considered the old trick about sugar in a gas tank. It seemed there might be some truth to it after all. Half a mile further, I saw a figure running down the road. As I got closer, it became clear it was Victor, still naked and heading toward the shore. I shook my head, wondering what kind of lunatic runs through the Montana wilderness in November without a stitch of clothing. Pulling Victor's phone from my pocket, I dialed 911 and reported the bizarre sight. "You've got a naked man running down Highway 12, I told the dispatcher, though I conveniently forgot to leave my name. An hour later, I drove past the spot where the elk had been hit. Feeling mischievous, I used Victor's phone to call my house. The first time, the call went to voicemail, so I hung up and called again. This time, Cindy picked up after a few rings, her voice groggy. "Hello. Turn on the light and see what's left of your boyfriend," I growled into the receiver, my tone cold. There was a pause, and then I heard a guttural scream from Cindy, followed by a string of frantic curses. "You sick bastard," she yelled. "You killed Victor. You're going to prison for this." The line went dead, and I smiled, imagining her panic as she tried to explain this mess to the police. By the time I reached the hunting camp around 4 in the morning, I was in high spirits. I hung my elk on the designated pole outside and noticed a few smaller elk already there. With a grin, I walked into the cabin, where old Danny McGraw was cooking breakfast. Danny always cooked the group's meals, making him one of the most popular guys in camp. He slapped a plate of bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes in front of me, and I dug in eagerly. As I ate, Tommy Barton stepped outside to check the weather. A minute later, he burst back inside, eyes wide. "Where the hell did you get that elk, Luke?" he demanded. "That's the biggest one I've ever seen." His question sparked a stampede to the front door as the other hunters rushed out to admire the massive rack on my prize. Few things inspire hope among hunters like the sight of a trophy elk taken by one of their own. It fires up their imaginations and renews their determination. "I got it last night," I explained, crafting a story about finding the elk in the thickest part of a laurel-covered thicket on a buddy's property. "He came charging through the brush, and I had to take him down with one shot," I said, embellishing the tale with dramatic pauses. The others listened, awestruck, before hurrying to gear up and head out. While they prepared for the day, I stripped off my clothes, climbed into my bunk, and fell into a deep sleep. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by someone calling my name. Opening one eye, I saw a man in a police uniform standing by my bed. "Mr. Reed," the officer began, his tone calm but dripping with sarcasm. "Sorry to interrupt your hunt, but we need to ask you a few questions." Groggy, I sat up and scratched my head before pulling on my shirt and pants. As I headed for the coffee pot, the officer continued, "That's a nice elk you've got there. Mind telling me where and when you bagged it?" "On a friend's property," I replied slowly. "The details are on the tag." The officer smirked. "All right, Mr. Reed, let's cut to the chase. Your wife called the police this morning. She claims you killed County Judge Victor Harper, cut out his heart and left it in your bed. To make matters worse, his car was found abandoned near your house, with a dead elk and an illegal shotgun in the trunk. Care to explain?" I grinned. "Wow, you guys are thorough. But you're chasing the wrong lead. Last I saw Victor, he was running through the woods naked. It took a while before I was called in to give my official statement, but that was not my main concern. What irked me more was learning that Victor Harper had accused me of manipulating him into believing I had cut Cindy's heart out and left it in our bed. He also claimed I planted an elk and an illegal shotgun in his car trunk and sabotaged his precious Cadillac. When the officer questioned me about it, I calmly explained, I have every right to practice my worship rituals for the gods of hunting in my own home. If Victor has a problem with those traditions, perhaps he should think twice before sneaking into someone else's marital bed. As for the elk, the shotgun, and his wrecked car, I cannot say. The man has plenty of enemies. Did you not tell me he also had a pillow with a removed tag? That's a federal offense, if I recall. Maybe he should take some responsibility for once in his life. I smirked as I continued. I've sat in his courtroom before. I've heard him tell people, when caught red-handed, that anyone would lie to avoid accountability. Perhaps it's time he takes a bit of his own advice and owns up to his mess. That night, back at home, I was half asleep in bed when I felt a stir beside me. I opened my eyes to find Cindy sitting on the edge of the bed. She had not been there when I went to sleep, so I knew something was on her mind. I suppose you know I called the kids and told them to lock the doors, Cindy began without preamble. I told them you went berserk and killed Victor. I even said they should call the police if you showed up. I heard something about that, now that you mention it, I replied evenly. You might have also heard, she continued, that I told the police you cut out Victor's heart and left it on our bed. I nodded, still keeping my calm. Yes, I heard that too. Well, Cindy added, her voice tinged with guilt, you probably know that Victor was charged with firearm violations, fined for transporting an illegal elk, and penalized for hunting without a license. The ADA even tried to prosecute him for removing the tag from the pillow, but I think that's perfectly legal once the pillow is sold. I raised an eyebrow. Really? I never knew that. So you can legally remove those tags once you buy the pillow? Guess the same applies to mattresses. Obviously, Dave, Cindy shot back, her tone growing sharper. It was a new pillow, and now it's covered in blood and God knows what else, along with all the linens from that bed. You didn't need to go to those lengths, though, Victor has enough legal problems on his plate. Knowing you, I'm shocked you didn't stash some crack or prescription pills in his car just for fun. Feigning innocence, I replied, I have no idea what you're talking about, Cindy. Victor's a cool guy, right? How could I possibly know what he gets up to when I never even realized he was sleeping with my wife? Cindy glared at me. You're not going to enjoy keeping that fool Doris around for long, she said, her voice heavy with bitterness. She's been married a few times and cannot keep her legs closed. The first time you turn your back, she'll spread them for someone else. Well, I said, shrugging, that seems to be a common theme with plenty of women. The difference is, I do not expect much from Doris. She's a bit of an idiot, sure, but she's fantastic in bed. Look at those breasts. I added, pulling the sheet back to emphasize my point. I told you a long time ago, I continued, that if I ever caught you cheating, I'd be in your cousin's bed faster than you could blink. You were warned, Cindy, so do not start whining now. It's not a good look for you. Cindy sighed heavily. Dave, I'll admit it, I set you up. Victor was the only man I ever cheated on you with, and it only happened a couple of times. But I suppose by the time you get tired of Doris, we will be even, right? Until then, I'll sleep in the guest room. I've been staying with Susan, but she's made it very clear she thinks I am a terrible mother. I shouldn't have called the kids and told them to lock the doors. They never would have known about my stupidity with Victor if I had not done that. You never would have told them, would you? You always made sure I handled my own mistakes when it came to the kids. That's true, I admitted. I never scolded you in front of them. You lost their respect on your own. Cindy nodded. And because of a pompous ass like Victor Harper. What are you going to do now, Dave? With a grin, I answered, I'm going to wait until you leave the room, and then I'm going to wake up your cousin. We'll have ourselves a very nice time together.
What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.
Bye bye.